Beneath the world's last great frozen frontier, a race has begun. No declaration, no headlines, no warning, no declaration, no headlines, no warning. 5 nations, 1 prize, 0 rules. The Arctic is no longer empty. The Arctic is no longer empty, and the world doesn't know it yet. 30% of the world's undiscovered oil, 13% of its gas. Shipping routes that could cut global transit time in half. All of it locked under this ice, and the ice is melting. For the first time in human history, the Arctic is open for business. Russia has already moved, China is already there, the formations are set, the stakes are rising. The United States is scrambling, Norway is watching. Canada is drawing lines no one respects. The map is being challenged. This is not a future conflict, it is happening right now. Beneath the ice, there are no laws that hold. Only the dark water remains. No court, no treaty, no force to enforce what's written. They move with the land while the world carves it up. Only power matters here. In this frozen landscape, power is the final word that everyone understands. And power right now is being repositioned. Climate change didn't just melt the ice, it shattered the silence. It unlocked a battlefield. The ice has retreated, revealing a new front for the next great global conflict. And every major power on Earth already has boots or ships on the ground. This is the story of the world's most dangerous real estate dispute. Svalbard, a Norwegian archipelago halfway between Norway and the North Pole, governed by Norway, but open to all 46 treaty nations. Russia has lived here for over a century. China arrived recently. This tiny island is ground zero for the Arctic Cold War. Moscow monitors NATO shipping lanes from here, legally, for decades, a listening post on the edge. Intelligence analysts believe it functions as a listening post. Russia's presence is built for power. Russia has militarized the Arctic more than any power in history. They watch the NATO response. And they've been doing it for decades, legally. Whoever owns the ridge controls the seabed beneath the North Pole, a silent battle for the abyss. The world laughed. Canada called it the 15th century. But Russia never stopped pressing the claim. Beneath the ice, the map is being redrawn. The Lomonosov Ridge, they argue, is Russian continental shelf, all of it. Control the northern sea route and you control global trade, a shorter path to a new era. Ships sailing from Asia to Europe save 40% on distance. The industrial weight is moving north. Russia has already commercialized it, $14 billion invested, shifting the center of energy eastward. Russia has already extracted billions. China is the buyer. A new energy hub is born. Canada claims the Northwest Passage as internal waters. They are drawing lines in the drifting ice. The United States, the EU, and Russia all disagree. It's international. Patrols watch the shifting borders. So who controls it when a Chinese tanker sails through uninvited? The halls of power remain divided. Nobody knows. That is the problem. The ice is gone and the laws are thin. The United States calls freedom of navigation a core interest, but the reality is carved in snow. The United States has exactly 2 operational icebreakers. The logistic weight is staggering. Russia has more than 50. The gap is staggering. The gap between rhetoric and reality in the Arctic is staggering. Presence is everything. China is not an Arctic nation, officially, but the cranes are already rising. But in 2018, Beijing declared itself a near-Arctic state, a new dragon in the north. It has no territorial claim, but it has strategic infrastructure in 6 Arctic countries. China calls this science. Intelligence agencies call it something else entirely. Greenland holds the world's 2nd largest rare earth mineral deposits, trillions beneath the white. Cobalt, lithium, uranium, and oil worth trillions, looking for the future beneath the ice. When China offered to develop it, Washington sent the Secretary of State. The deals are being made behind closed doors. Trump offered to buy Greenland. Denmark said no. The mining continues and the ocean warms. The Arctic Council was built on the idea of peaceful cooperation. Now the room is silent. 8 nations, 1 table, shared interests. This was the dream of Tromsø. After 2022, Russia walked out. 7 nations couldn't function without the 8th. The silence is deafening. The last diplomatic guardrail in the Arctic has been broken. Agreements sit unused. Norway shares a land border with Russia in the Arctic. A frontier once quiet, now active. For decades, it was the quietest frontier in the world. Today, the engines of war never rest. Today, Norwegian jets scramble nearly every week. They watch each other constantly across the divide. The neighbors no longer speak, but the barriers are lit. The silent land grab continues. Murmansk is Russia's crown jewel of Arctic power, the gateway to the Northern Fleet. Home to the Northern Fleet, Russia's largest and most powerful naval force, tension is the new normal. Nuclear-armed submarines depart from here regularly. The base is an engine of power. Nuclear-armed submarines depart from here regularly. Their destination is beneath the ice, where no satellite can follow. S-400 missile systems cover the airspace. Radar covers the sea. An Arctic iron curtain. The Trefoil base on Franz Josef Land can house 150 soldiers year-round, training for the unthinkable. S-400 missile systems cover the airspace. Radar covers the sea. An Arctic iron curtain. Russia has militarized the Arctic more than any power in history. They have built an empire of ice. Finland and Sweden's NATO membership changed the Arctic equation overnight. The buildup is rapid. Russia now borders NATO from the Baltic to the Barents Sea. The map has shifted forever. The Nordic corridor is closed. Moscow's Arctic flank is exposed. The alliance is present. Every Russian move in the Arctic now faces a NATO response, watching from the edge of the world. The Bering Strait is 55 miles wide, America on one side, Russia on the other, a razor's edge of geopolitics. It is the only waterway connecting the Arctic Ocean to the Pacific, a bottleneck of power. Whoever controls it controls the flow of trade from Asia, a fleet on the move. Right now, both powers are watching each other across 55 miles every single day. The watch never ends. The Arctic holds energy reserves worth over $35 trillion, a furnace in the dark. Russia has already extracted billions. China is the buyer. The market is shifting east. Aerial cinematic. Pipeline construction in frozen Siberian tundra, hundreds of workers, heavy machinery, enormous scale. Now Arctic energy is being rerouted, eastward, away from Western control. A new flow of wealth. 50,000 Inuit people have lived in the Arctic for 5,000 years. Their world is changing fast. They have no army, no navy, no seat at the geopolitical table, but the ink is marking their future. But the land being carved up is their homeland. They are the first witnesses to the thaw. And nobody asked them. Modernity arrives at the edge of everything, uninvited. The transpolar route cuts Asia to Europe shipping by 40%. The ice is gone, the path is open. It only exists because the ice is gone. Beijing calls it the Polar Silk Road. China has already run dozens of commercial transits, more every year, strategic logistics at play. The rules that govern this wilderness were written when the ice was permanent. Converging paths, diverging interests. Under international law, nations can claim territory 350 miles beyond their coastline. Tension at the table. The legal process moves at the speed of glaciers. Science is the only currency in the UN. The UN Commission has the files. It has been deliberating for 20 years, deliberating on a world they can barely see. No decision, no deadline, no enforcement mechanism if one is reached. The lines are purely digital for now. The United States needs Greenland strategically. It says so publicly. A guardian in the gray mist. China wants Greenland's minerals. It funds companies that look for them. A modern city with ancient ties. Greenland is Danish territory, but Greenland wants independence. A new generation redraws the lines. Greenland's 57,000 people are the most geopolitically coveted community on Earth. The domes are watching. Every radar dome in the region is pointed at this fact. Tension in the polar silence. Russian interceptors and NATO reconnaissance planes play cat and mouse daily. Eyes in the sky. One miscalculation at these altitudes could cascade in minutes, the climb to a new conflict. America has exactly 1 Arctic brigade. Russia has 7. The gap is a matter of strategic survival. The Pentagon's 2024 Arctic strategy acknowledged the gap. Congress allocated funding. Construction began on icebreakers. Congress allocated funding. Construction began on icebreakers that won't be ready until 2030. Russia will have built 12 more. Russia will have built 12 more installations by then. The shield goes up across the ice. America's own Arctic holds enormous energy wealth. The North Slope already produces. ANWR's reserves remain frozen, politically, watching the pressure build. Meanwhile, Russia pumps billions of barrels from its Arctic fields. A silent pulse of energy. The energy war is already underway, and America is playing defense, a strategic standoff in the polar night. The Arctic is warming 4 times faster than the global average. The ice is moving faster. By 2040, scientists project ice-free summers in the Arctic Ocean. Every core sample tells a story of disappearing ice. Every degree of warming opens more territory, more resources, more conflict. The melt is a trigger. By 2040, scientists project ice-free summers. Every degree of warming opens more territory. NATO has never faced a threat this far north. The alliance is adapting slowly. Its infrastructure was built for Central Europe, not for permafrost and polar night. The alliance is adapting slowly. Russia has been ready for decades, a show of maritime power. In the Arctic, NATO is catching up. Russia is already home. Presence is the only currency that matters. The United States watches everything from orbit. Every Russian installation, every Chinese vessel, every new runway. The United States watches everything from orbit. Every Russian installation, every Chinese vessel. Watching is not acting. And in the Arctic, presence is the only currency that matters. Only presence counts, a watch that never blinks. The Kola Peninsula is 12 times more nuclear-armed than any other place on Earth, a third of the force. It holds a third of Russia's entire strategic nuclear force, a display of Arctic might. Nuclear-armed submarines depart from here regularly, their destination beneath the ice. The Kola Peninsula is 12 times more nuclear-armed than any other place on Earth, a trigger on the edge. Beijing plays the long game. It doesn't need to own the Arctic, it just needs to be indispensable. Each pillar advances the same objective: permanent strategic presence. China's Arctic strategy has 3 pillars: resources, routes, and research, a patrol for science. It just needs to be indispensable to those who do. Beijing's influence is global and growing. Russia, Canada, and Denmark all claim the Lomonosov Ridge. Whoever owns it controls the deep. A Danish geological team presenting data showing the ridge connects to Greenland's continental shelf. The science of claims. A Russian geological ship completing seabed surveys near the North Pole. A probe into the unknown. The science is contested. The politics are explosive. The legal process moves at the speed of glaciers. Neodymium, dysprosium, the Arctic has them all, yellow machines on a white desert. The Arctic is the only alternative supply. Everyone knows it. The race for minerals is a race for the future. Lithium, cobalt, neodymium, a glow of trillions beneath the ice. China controls 60% of global rare earth processing. The Arctic is the only alternative supply. No nation owns the North Pole. Officially, a frozen kingdom waiting to be claimed. But every major power is acting as though it will. The rules that govern this wilderness were written when the ice was permanent. The game is changing. The ice is gone, the rules are next. The North Pole is now an open sea of ambition. The legal process moves at the speed of glaciers, which are now moving faster. The UN watches. Russia tested the Kinjal hypersonic missile from the Arctic in 2024. It travels at 10 times the speed of sound. No current defense system can intercept it. Its launch platform is an Arctic-based Tu-22M3 bomber. The Arctic is no longer a buffer zone, it is a launch pad. The United States Defense Establishment has called the Arctic its new flank. For 40 years, that flank was secured by ice. Now it is a highway, and America's northern defense infrastructure was built for a frozen world. The scramble to catch up is classified, but the gap is real. China's Arctic Research Station in Svalbard is legally permitted under the 1920 treaty. Norwegian officials acknowledge they cannot restrict what goes on inside. Western intelligence agencies believe it includes signals collection equipment. China calls it science. In geopolitics, location is the argument. Russia earned $1.5 billion in 2024 from Northern Sea Route transit fees. It controls every icebreaker capable of keeping it open in winter. Without Russian permission and Russian icebreakers, the route closes. Moscow has built a toll road on international water, and it works. America and Canada disagree on where the Arctic border runs. The dispute is not new. It is 70 years old. But in a frozen sea, nobody needed to enforce it. Now there is oil in the disputed zone. Both countries want it. Neither backs down. Beneath the Arctic surface, the most dangerous game in geopolitics continues. Submarines from 6 nations patrol these waters simultaneously. They track each other sometimes for weeks, in total silence. A collision or misidentification here would have no witnesses, only consequences. The Arctic holds twice as much carbon as the atmosphere currently contains. As permafrost thaws, it releases methane, a gas 80 times more potent than CO2. Scientists call it the carbon bomb. Politicians call it a resource opportunity. The same warming that threatens the planet is making the Arctic accessible. Russia's Arctic military doctrine is clear: dominate the Juk Gap. The Greenland-Iceland-UK choke point controls Atlantic access. Russian submarines must pass through it to reach the open ocean. Controlling this gap is Russia's most critical strategic priority after nuclear deterrence. Iceland sits at the hinge of the Juk Gap, one of NATO's most critical choke points. In the Cold War, hundreds of ASW assets watched this water. Today, far fewer, and Russian submarine deployments have tripled. The gap that never closed during the Cold War is being challenged again. Western oil majors left Russian Arctic projects after 2022 sanctions. But they didn't leave the Arctic. They moved to Norwegian, Alaskan, and Greenlandic fields. The race for Arctic energy didn't stop. It split into two parallel races. One Western, one Russian-Chinese, both accelerating. The United States has 2 operational icebreakers. Russia has 46, including 10 nuclear-powered. As permafrost thaws, it releases methane, a gas 80 times more potent than CO2. In the time it takes America to build one, Russia commissions 3. This is the power gap nobody in Washington wants to talk about. The race for Arctic energy didn't stop. It split into 2 parallel races. Not just for resources, for submarine navigation corridors. If conflict comes, Chinese submarines will need routes that avoid NATO sonar arrays. The mapping China does today is the operational planning it will use tomorrow. 95% of global internet traffic runs through undersea cables. The Arctic cables carry data between continents every millisecond. Russian and Chinese submarines have been observed loitering near cable landing points. Cutting these cables could disconnect the West, silently, without a shot fired. Russia's Leader-class icebreakers are the largest ever built, 209 meters of Arctic power. Each one can maintain a 50-meter-wide shipping channel through the thickest ice. 3 are being built. The first entered service in 2027. With these ships, Russia can keep the Northern Sea route open year-round, permanently. The Arctic's remote infrastructure is connected to the world by a handful of data links. Remote monitoring stations, drilling platforms, weather systems, all networked. Every NATO Arctic operation plan includes a GPS-denied phase, because it will happen. A coordinated cyber attack on Arctic infrastructure could blind NATO's Northern Early Warning before a single aircraft moved. Novaya Zemlya was where the Soviet Union detonated the Tsar Bomba, the largest nuclear weapon ever tested. Today it hosts an active Russian military installation. New construction was detected by satellite in 2025. Its purpose, classified. In the Arctic, the line between research facility and weapon is deliberately blurred. Finland's NATO membership added 1,240 kilometers of new NATO-Russia border overnight. Russia called it a provocation. Finland called it survival. Finland has 280,000 reservists, more than most NATO countries' standing armies. In the Arctic, Finland is NATO's sharpest new edge. Canada calls itself an Arctic nation, and it is right, geographically. But its Arctic military capability has been underfunded for 30 years. The Northwest Passage is claimed as internal waters, but Canada cannot enforce that claim. The Northwest Passage is claimed as internal waters, but Canada cannot enforce that claim. The Arctic is not just a geopolitical arena, it is a climate engine. The ocean currents it generates regulate weather across the entire northern hemisphere. As the Arctic warms, those currents destabilize. The nations fighting over Arctic territory are also accelerating its transformation. China and Russia have conducted joint Arctic patrols every year since 2022. Their navies operate together in waters where they once operated separately. The Beijing-Moscow axis is not an alliance of affection. It is one of strategic convenience. In the Arctic, convenience is producing real military coordination. Britain has fought in the Arctic before. In both world wars, the convoys ran this way. Today, the Royal Navy is relearning what it once knew. London understands that what happens in the Arctic does not stay in the Arctic. 31 Alaskan Native communities face imminent displacement from climate change. Some villages are already moving, at a cost of hundreds of millions per community. The great powers argue over who owns the Arctic while its inhabitants are swept into the sea. This is the human cost that never appears in territorial claim maps. Russia built an empire on permafrost. That foundation is now melting. Infrastructure worth hundreds of billions is at risk. Norilsk's spill in 2020, when permafrost failure ruptured a fuel tank, released 21,000 tons of diesel. The Arctic that Russia is expanding into is also destroying what Russia already built there. The Arctic is a GPS-degraded environment. Navigation satellites don't cover the poles well. Russia operates the most capable anti-GPS jamming systems in the world. In a conflict scenario, they would activate first, blinding navigation and communications. Every NATO Arctic operation plan includes a GPS-denied phase, because it will happen. Every nation in this race will tell you its intentions are peaceful. Every nation is preparing for the alternative. The Arctic has been the world's last pristine wilderness. It is about to become something else. America's 2024 National Defense Strategy identified the Arctic as a priority theater. Priority, not primary, the Pentagon's primary focus remains the Pacific and Europe. Russia and China have made the Arctic primary. That asymmetry is the vulnerability that keeps Arctic commanders awake. Jan Mayen, a volcanic island with 18 permanent personnel and a runway. It is also one of NATO's most critical early warning positions for submarine and aircraft activity. The Russians know this. They tested its air defense coverage in 2024. Small islands in the Arctic carry strategic weight disproportionate to their size. Norway is the only Western nation actively expanding Arctic oil production. The Barents Sea is now a core production zone. Johan Castberg came online in 2024. Oslo uses Arctic revenues to fund the world's largest sovereign wealth fund. Norway is simultaneously an environmental leader and an aggressive Arctic resource extractor. Russia has deployed Bastion anti-ship missile systems across its Arctic coastline. Their range covers most of the Arctic Ocean. Any NATO ship operating in these waters is within range of shore-based attack. Russia has turned the entire Arctic coastline into a weapons launch corridor. Russia has declared large sections of the Arctic Ocean as restricted navigation zones. Under international law, it cannot do this in international waters, but Russian Coast Guard vessels enforce it anyway. The law says one thing, the ship with the gun says another. The United States conducts freedom of navigation overflights above Russia's claimed Arctic zones. Russia intercepts them every time. Sometimes the intercepts are professional. Sometimes they are dangerous. This is the daily reality of Arctic deterrence, played out at 35,000 feet. Scientists have monitored the Arctic together for 60 years. The data gathered prevents catastrophic weather surprises across the Northern Hemisphere. After 2022, Russia stopped sharing its Arctic climate data with the West. Global weather modeling deteriorated overnight. A geopolitical act with human consequences. Nome, Alaska, population 3,500, is being planned as America's first true deepwater Arctic port. The project will take a decade and billions of dollars. Russia's Arctic port infrastructure is already operational and expanding. The Arctic is finally being treated as a theater, not just a geographic curiosity. NATO's Nordic members have been sounding the alarm about the Arctic for 10 years. Washington listened, then moved on to the next crisis. After Finland and Sweden joined, the listening became action. The Arctic is finally being treated as a theater, not just a geographic curiosity. The most important intelligence battlefield in the Arctic isn't on the ice. In the modern Arctic, nothing is hidden, which is why everything is still contested. Reconnaissance satellites from 5 nations orbit continuously, watching everything below. In the modern Arctic, nothing is hidden, which is why everything is still contested. Every U.S. president since Reagan has been briefed on Arctic war scenarios. 90,000 personnel, 500 aircraft, 120 ships, simultaneous. The scenarios have never been more realistic than they are today. The Arctic is the most hostile operating environment on Earth. Climate change makes it more accessible, but it also makes it more unpredictable. And every nation that tests the limit moves the limit. The question is, what spark is small enough to be missed until it isn't? Every Arctic drilling permit signed is a bet that the worst won't happen. Nations are expanding commercial shipping into these waters while cutting emergency response budgets. If a ship sinks in the high Arctic, the nearest response force is hours, often days, away. The Arctic's economic opening is outpacing its safety systems. It can be launched from the Arctic and travel to any ocean on Earth. But Beijing's defense budget allocates billions to cold weather warfare capability. Russia's Poseidon is a nuclear-armed underwater drone the size of a submarine. Russia has created the most comprehensive area denial system on Earth in the Arctic. Sovereignty incidents in Canadian Arctic waters are increasing every year. The question is not whether the Arctic can become a conflict zone. The Arctic Council has not had a full meeting since 2022. Diplomacy has been replaced by unilateral action. NATO's Arctic surveillance depends on satellites. In the first minutes of any conflict, those satellites would be targeted. It is a defense supply chain issue. NATO has invoked Arctic consultations 3 times in the last 2 years. Russia and China have both demonstrated the ability to destroy satellites in orbit. The Arctic is now a hypersonic strike corridor from both sides. The Arctic has the lowest SR infrastructure density of any ocean on Earth. In 2010, the Gulf of Mexico had calm seas, warm weather, and the full resources of the world's largest economy. Foreign vessels transit without notification. Canada protests. They proceed. Foreign vessels transit without notification. Canada protests. They proceed. The gap between what Canada claims and what it can enforce has never been wider. In 2025, Russia conducted its largest Arctic military exercise in 30 years. The message was not subtle. 60-knot winds, darkness for months, ice that forms faster than ships can move. When incidents have no diplomatic channel, they escalate. Norwegian military satellites provide intelligence that supplements U.S. systems. The nations racing to control it are often fighting the weather first. NATO has no reliable detection capability for it in the Arctic deep. Polar orbit satellites launched from Andoya have direct line of sight to the entire Arctic region. Russian submarine activity through the Guyuk Gap has reached Cold War peak levels. A NATO carrier strike group entering this zone would face simultaneous attacks from multiple vectors: anti-ship missiles, surface-to-air missiles, submarines, mines. And NATO's anti-submarine capability in this region is stretched dangerously thin. China currently has no Arctic military presence, officially. Iceland sits at the center of NATO's most critical underwater choke point. Iceland has no military of its own. Its security is entirely dependent on NATO. Its detonation would create a radioactive tsunami. NATO has no reliable detection capability for it in the Arctic deep. The nations racing to control it are often fighting the weather first. Polar orbit satellites launched from Andoya have direct line of sight to the entire Arctic region. 1.3 million seed varieties, every crop species on Earth. The question is not whether China will militarize the Arctic, it is when. When no one is talking, misunderstandings become incidents. NATO watched from every sensor it had. Its Navy is training for polar operations. Its Air Force is studying Arctic logistics. Norway is now a spacefaring nation, specifically because of the Arctic. The Inuit Circumpolar Council represents 180,000 people across 4 nations. The Arctic Council has not had a full meeting since 2022. Blinding NATO's Arctic eyes is step 1 of any adversary playbook. The Arctic competition has extended above the atmosphere. They have been inhabiting the Arctic since before any current nation-state existed. An Arctic oil spill in winter ice conditions would be effectively uncontrollable. It still took 87 days to cap the Deepwater Horizon blowout. They have been inhabiting the Arctic since before any current nation-state existed. In 2010, the Gulf of Mexico had calm seas, warm weather, and the full resources of the world's largest economy. An Arctic oil spill in winter ice conditions would be effectively uncontrollable. NATO watched from every sensor it had. Its Navy is training for polar operations. Its Air Force is studying Arctic logistics. Its detonation would create a radioactive tsunami. The question is not whether China will militarize the Arctic, it is when. When no one is talking, misunderstandings become incidents. It still took 87 days to cap the Deepwater Horizon blowout. Their rights to the land are recognized in multiple frameworks. They have been inhabiting the Arctic since before any current nation-state existed. Iceland sits at the center of NATO's most critical underwater choke point. Blinding NATO's Arctic eyes is step one of any adversary playbook. The Inuit Circumpolar Council represents 180,000 people across 4 nations. None of those frameworks have military force backing them. This is our home, not your battlefield. The Arctic competition has extended above the atmosphere. An Arctic oil spill in winter ice conditions would be effectively uncontrollable. An uncontrolled oil spill in Arctic winter ice would be an extinction-level event for multiple species. Its detonation would create a radioactive tsunami. The Arctic's mineral wealth is not just an economic prize. The Arctic Ocean is home to species found nowhere else on Earth: narwhals, polar bears, bowhead whales. Its detonation would create a radioactive tsunami. The instability that powers don't want to talk about is the climate itself. The question is, what spark is small enough to be missed until it isn't? Every Arctic drilling permit signed is a bet that the worst won't happen. A NATO carrier strike group entering this zone would face simultaneous attacks from multiple vectors. An Arctic oil spill in winter ice conditions would be effectively uncontrollable. It is a defense supply chain issue. Every F-35 requires 417 kilograms of rare earth materials. Every destroyer needs 2,000 kilograms. China controls 85% of rare earth processing, and nobody has the technology to stop one. The Arctic's mineral wealth is not just an economic prize. The Arctic Ocean is home to species found nowhere else on Earth: narwhals, polar bears, bowhead whales. No NATO missile defense system can intercept a Mach 10 weapon. Norway shares 196 kilometers of land border with Russia. For 70 years, it maintained a policy of reassurance without provocation. Every strategic equation changes when the weapon arrives before the warning. Russia tested an Arctic submarine-launched hypersonic weapon in 2025. Its detonation would create a radioactive tsunami. International law in the Arctic is applied selectively. The UN Security Council could theoretically rule on Arctic disputes. Russia has a permanent veto. China has a permanent veto. It is being deployed to the Arctic. An uncontrolled oil spill in Arctic winter ice would be an extinction-level event for multiple species. No NATO missile defense system can intercept a Mach 10 weapon. The instability that powers don't want to talk about is the climate itself. Every F-35 requires 417 kilograms of rare earth materials. Every destroyer needs 2,000 kilograms. The Arctic's mineral wealth is not just an economic prize. If a ship sinks in the high Arctic, the nearest response force is hours, often days, away. UNCLOS governs the seas, but Russia, the United States, and China all interpret it differently. The UN Security Council could theoretically rule on Arctic disputes. Russia has a permanent veto. China has a permanent veto. International law in the Arctic is applied selectively. It is applied by the nations with the power to ignore it. Norway shares 196 kilometers of land border with Russia. For 70 years, it maintained a policy of reassurance without provocation. That policy changed in 2022. It is being deployed to the Arctic. NATO's Arctic surveillance satellites are already within its theoretical engagement envelope. Multiple NATO war games have explored a Russian hybrid seizure of Svalbard. Russia is reactivating every Soviet-era Arctic military base that was abandoned after 1991. Tixi, Narian Mar, Anadyr, Dixon. NATO response time, 72 hours. Russian consolidation time, 48 hours. It would be too late. Russian naval forces have used the island chain for transit operations increasingly since 2022. NORAD's Arctic radar coverage has gaps, known gaps, acknowledged by the Pentagon. Every prediction about Arctic opening has been wrong by underestimating the speed. Norway now operates its full coastal defense at elevated readiness every day. A little green men operation in the Arctic would not look like a conventional invasion. An Arctic oil spill in winter ice conditions would be effectively uncontrollable. An Arctic oil spill in winter ice conditions would be effectively uncontrollable. The Arctic competition has extended above the atmosphere. The race to claim the Arctic is being run on a track that is disappearing. In those gaps, a cruise missile from a submarine could transit undetected. The scenarios consistently show the same result. Russia can act faster than NATO can respond. The darkness of the Barents Sea hides a constant high-stakes watch. The infrastructure that seemed like Cold War relics is becoming the backbone of a new Arctic military posture. Every decision in nuke ripples through the halls of NATO. The Aleutian Islands are a stepping stone across the Pacific to the Arctic. The North Warning System, America's northern radar fence, was designed in the 1980s. Upgrading it costs billions. The instability that powers don't want to talk about is the climate itself. The silent witness to a world that is simply vanishing. The plans just waited for the ice to melt. The United States has military installations on Adak and other Aleutian Islands. This is what Arctic competition looks like from the water level. 2 powers, 2 ships, 1 ocean, and no rules that either fully accepts. The ships don't fire, but the tension does not dissolve. It accumulates, year by year, ton of ice by ton of ice. Every war game that models full Arctic conflict reaches the same conclusion. There is no winner, there is only degrees of loss. Energy markets collapse, global trade stops, ecosystems fail. The Arctic war that no one wants would cost everyone everything. Sovereignty in the Arctic ultimately comes down to presence. A ranger in a white suit, a buoy in the current, a flag in the ice. These small acts of presence are what nations use to build legal precedent. The Arctic is being claimed 1 footstep at a time. Diplomats know what generals refuse to accept. Conflict in the Arctic serves no one. Quiet negotiations happen in rooms that never make the news. A draft Arctic Code of Conduct circulates, unsigned by Russia, unacknowledged by China. The window for a managed solution is not closed, but it is closing. Svalbard is Norwegian territory, the treaty says so clearly, but the treaty also grants 46 nations the right to operate there. That distinction between presence and sovereignty is being tested every season. When the Coast Guard finds something new, Oslo calls it a concern, Moscow calls it legal. The Guyuk Gap has been the most contested undersea corridor on Earth for 80 years. During the Cold War, NATO had 1-200 anti-submarine aircraft assigned to this gap. Today it has fewer than 50. The gap that NATO nearly lost in the 1980s is being challenged again with fewer defenders. Washington has signed a new strategic partnership with Greenland's government. It includes investment commitments, infrastructure development, and defense cooperation. It does not resolve Greenland's push for independence, and it does not answer what happens to U.S. bases if independence is achieved. America's new polar security cutter finally enters service in 2028. 3 years behind schedule, 100% over budget. Russia commissioned 3 new icebreakers in the same period. But it is a start, and in the Arctic, starting late is better than not starting at all. Russia declared the Arctic its primary strategic direction in its 2026 review. Not Europe, not the Pacific, the Arctic. The Northern Fleet received more funding in 2025 than any other military command. Moscow is not preparing for a future Arctic contest. It believes it has already won. China presents its Arctic program as purely scientific. Its icebreaker has collected more Arctic seabed data than any non-Arctic state. Some of that data is published, some is classified. The data that is not shared tells you more than the data that is. NATO has finally designated the Arctic as a primary operational theater. Allied exercises now regularly include 40,000 plus troops in the high north. Infrastructure funding has quadrupled since 2022. The alliance is late, but it is moving, and in the right direction. When Lloyd's of London starts writing routine Arctic shipping insurance, the world changes. Not a crisis, a market. The Arctic is no longer an adventure, it is a supply chain, and supply chains don't ask for permission. Canada has begun integrating Inuit sovereignty into its Arctic legal strategy. Inuit rangers using advanced surveillance technology funded by the Canadian government to monitor their own territory. It is a slow revolution, but it changes the geometry of who owns the Arctic. 5,000 years of Inuit presence outweighs 50 years of anyone else's claims. Greenland has chosen a path, develop its own resources on its own terms. Not Chinese terms, not American terms, Greenlandic terms. The rare earth deposits under its ice will fund independence, if managed correctly. This small island is building sovereign power 1 mineral at a time. Russia and China have formalized what sanctions forced them to create: an Arctic energy partnership worth $400 billion over 20 years. Every LNG tanker that leaves Yamal carries Russian gas and Chinese money. The sanctions designed to isolate Russia created a different Russia, one facing east. Cold Response 2026 sent a message, in the language militaries understand: 30,000 troops, 200 aircraft, 20 warships, 4 weeks. Russia observed every movement. China observed from orbit. Messages in the Arctic are not spoken, they are deployed. Finland and Sweden's NATO accession reduced Russian strategic depth dramatically. The Baltic is now a NATO lake. Russia's Arctic flank is compressed. But the Arctic Ocean itself remains outside NATO's defended perimeter. The gap between what NATO controls and what Russia claims is still enormous. In the summer of 2026, for the first time in recorded human history, the North Pole has no ice. Scientists predicted this moment. Nobody wanted to believe it. Within hours of the confirmation, 3 nations' naval vessels are within 200 kilometers. The symbolic center of the Arctic is open, and everyone wants to claim it. The United Nations attempted to address Arctic militarization formally for the first time. The resolution called for a freeze on new military installations. Russia vetoed, China abstained. The world's last peacekeeping mechanism reached its limit at the top of the world. Foreign vessels in Alaskan Arctic waters have increased 400% since 2020. The Coast Guard has the same number of vessels it had a decade ago. The math does not work, and every captain knows it. Presence is a resource. America is spending it faster than it is building it. In 2026, Russia achieves what it set out to do in 2012. The Northern Sea Route is open year-round, fully operational. It handles 40 million tons of cargo annually, growing. Moscow has built something permanent. The question is, who will challenge it? America and Canada complete the first phase of the new Arctic Early Warning System. For the first time since the 1980s, NORAD can see into the Arctic without gaps. It cost $11 billion and took 4 years. Russia had complete Arctic radar coverage in 2014. 7 Arctic nations signed the first binding environmental protection protocol. Oil drilling exclusion zones, shipping emissions standards, emergency response coordination. Russia does not sign. 1/8 of the Arctic's coastline remains unprotected. But 7/8 is further than anyone has ever managed before. China now operates research stations at both poles simultaneously. Its polar capabilities rival any nation's except Russia's in the Arctic. Beijing does not claim territory, it claims understanding. And understanding in geopolitics is the prerequisite for everything that follows. The United States has finally submitted its Arctic continental shelf claim. It overlaps with Russia's. It overlaps with Canada's. It overlaps with Denmark's. 4 nations claiming the same seabed, 1 UN commission, no enforcement mechanism. The law is clear that there is no clarity, and the ice keeps melting. Even amid geopolitical conflict, some cooperation persists. The Barents Sea Fisheries Agreement has held through wars, sanctions, and crises. Fish must be managed or they disappear. Both sides know this. The last thread of cooperation in the Arctic is a cod quota, but it is a thread. Norway has taken the wargame results seriously. In 2026, Svalbard received its first permanent military garrison since World War II. When the Coast Guard finds something new, Oslo calls it a concern. Moscow calls it legal. Oslo called it a defensive measure. Moscow called it a provocation. 26 nations signed the Oslo Arctic Principles, a voluntary commitment to restraint, transparency, and environmental protection. Russia does not sign. China signs, with reservations attached. Voluntary principles are better than no principles, but only barely. Russia commissioned 3 new icebreakers in the same period. South Korea, Japan, and China all pay Russia transit fees regularly. The geopolitical leverage Russia built through Arctic investment is now operational. It earns more from Arctic transit every year than it costs to operate the fleet. At the edges of empire, ordinary moments still happen. A soldier watches the lights, an elder reads the ice. They are both trying to understand the same place. One with instruments, one with memory older than any nation. The Western Arctic Coalition launches its first coordinated patrol in 2026. The gap between what NATO controls and what Russia claims is still enormous. But the Arctic Ocean itself remains outside NATO's defended perimeter. But the coalition is real, the patrol is real, and presence is everything. Every empire in history has sought to control the world's great commons. The seas, the skies, space. The Arctic is the last major commons on Earth. 7 Arctic nations signed the first binding environmental protection protocol. Beijing does not claim territory, it claims understanding. The law is clear that there is no clarity, and the ice keeps melting. The institutions built for the Cold War's end may survive the Cold War's return. The question is whether anyone will use them. The Arctic does not know it is being divided. The Northern Sea Route is now a permanent feature of global shipping. The animals that depend on it do not understand the maps being drawn. Only humans draw maps, and only humans can choose what to do with them. The North Pole has no owner. It has never had one. For most of human history, it didn't need one. The ice kept everyone out. The ice is gone, the powers are in, the decisions have not been made. What humanity chooses to do in the next 10 years will define the century that follows.